Hi, this video is part 2 of my tour of New Zealand archaeological sites. In this one I'll be venturing into different areas and looking at different sorts of sites, with a lot more sites that people have no idea exist. Again, due to the nature of this video, I'll be using Google Earth, so all credit for aerial photography goes to Google Earth and the data providers. This tour starts just to the west of New Plymouth, on the west coast of the North Island. The Omata Stockade was built in early 1860 by the local Taranaki militia, in the tensions with Maori leading up to the First Taranaki War. Like many New Zealand war sites, the stockade was built on the site of a Maori pa, in this case named Ngāturi. The stockade was the brainchild of Thomas Good and George Burton, who along with 60 or 70 settlers worked hard to construct the fort on the commanding location. It had a 10-foot-high, bulletproof, solid wooden wall with 2 flanking bastions and a drawbridge for access. A 60-foot-high signal mast allowed communication with the other posts. The British troops were impressed with the quality of the little fort, and Colonel Alexander of the 14th Regiment wrote an article on the stockade for the technical papers of the Royal Engineers Institute. The wooden parts of the fort are now long gone, demolished by local farmers for firewood in 1867. But the earthworks, possibly originating in the defences of Ngāturi Pass, still remain, and the site is now a Department of Conservation reserve. An archaeological excavation of Omata Stockade occurred in 1977, directed by Nigel Prickett. They uncovered evidence relating to its 6-year-long use in the New Zealand Wars. Something of interest is that a local farmer has built his own replica of the stockade a bit down the road. Moving around the coast and sticking with the time period, we come to the site of the wreck of the SS Lord Worsley, near the Taranaki town of Otago. In September 1862, after the First Taranaki War, the 600-ton 3-masted steamer carrying passengers, mail, chrome ore and gold from Nelson in the South Island to New Plymouth wrecked on the coast with 60 people on board. At the time, the nearest European settlements were New Plymouth, 58 kilometres to the north, and Whanganui, 118 kilometres to the east. The captain and 4 of the crew eventually made the dangerous journey to New Plymouth around Cape Egmont to raise the alarm in the ship's dinghy. The passengers and the remainder of the crew, most of whose destinations had been Auckland or Sydney in Australia, were housed by Wiramu Kingi Te Matakatia in his village nearby. According to a newspaper article at the time, a rescue party was sent overland from New Plymouth, but they were stopped at the border gate, where Maori guards demanded the fee per head for the rescue party to cross the border. It was estimated at the time that the rescue party's fee would have been £1,500, or roughly £170,000 in today's money. Nevertheless, the passengers were helped by Maori to travel overland to New Plymouth, each paying £5 to pass through the border crossing. The wreck and its contents became the property of the Maori who rescued the passengers. One man, Robert Graham, passed through the crossing 3 times with the help of a friendly gate guard named Hori Teira to smuggle the Lord Worsley's cargo of gold through to New Plymouth, an act that would save Hori from the hangman's noose in Auckland years later. As we move around the coast, we reach the site of Taranaki Pa, the impressive piece of military engineering that marked the end of the Maori leader Te Tokuwaru's campaign against the New Zealand government in 1869. Government forces had been defeated at Tunutu o Te Manu and again at Moturoa. As a result, South Taranaki settlements had been abandoned and Te Tokuwaru now threatened Whanganui. Given the success, or lack thereof, the government forces had had, fortifications were built right from Whanganui to Wellington, faring a march southwards to the capital by Te Tokuwaru. Taranaki Pa shows adaptations not present in earlier gunfighter pa, hidden snipers' nests up in the trees around outside the pa, as well as a 30-foot-high bulletproof tower where the warriors with rifles, some likely to be breech-loading, could pick off government troops. This pa never fell to the government troops. It was while here that Te Tokuwaru's army fell apart and he was forced to abandon it and his campaign. Let's take a break from war for a moment and go to the South Island. While the 1860s saw the North Island embroiled in bloody wars between the British and colonial government and Maori, in Otago and the South Island a gold rush was going on. When gold was discovered in Otago in 1861, thousands of miners flooded the region, similar to the rushes of California and Australia. This is Gabriel's Gully, where the rush began, a spot that once held 10,000 miners. By 1867, over 62,000 kilos of gold had been mined out of Otago, and the province is covered in archaeological sites relating to the extraction and processing of gold, and the housing and servicing of the many miners. The Otago provincial government encouraged Chinese miners to come to the province to replace the European miners who were moving on to the new rushes on the west coast in 1866. Many of the sites in this area reflect that different culture, as the Chinese miners had their own separate settlements and their own shops selling Chinese products to their clientele. Now we venture north to Mare Island, a dormant volcanic island in the Bay of Plenty. Known as Tuhua to Maori, this tiny island was of great value as it was the source of the highest quality obsidian in the country, which was traded extensively prior to the arrival of Europeans. The ridgelines and headlands provide ideal location for pa, which occupies strategic positions all over the island, bolstered by the sheer natural cliffs that protect most of the coastline. Chunks of obsidian drop from said cliffs and were also actively quarried. Heading back south, we arrive at Whanganui. An original New Zealand company town, the land was purchased from Maori in a debacle in 1840. And the ongoing tensions between Maori and the New Zealand company regarding the purchase eventually led to armed conflict in 1847, despite the fact that most of the Maori got on perfectly well with the settlers themselves. This site here, Pukinamu Pa, would be fortified by British soldiers of the 58th Rutlandshire Regiment and named the Rutland Stockade after them. The lack of timber in the area meant that the wood to build the stockade ended up having to be purchased from Maori, transported as rafts from 10 miles upriver. The stockade consisted of 2 blockhouses at opposite corners and a palisade around. In one form or another, it stood for 40 years, when it was finally demolished to create Queen's Park. It's remembered in Whanganui's town coat of arms, with the blockhouse atop the helm. Moving back north, we arrive at Tairua in the Coromandel Peninsula. This sleepy summer holiday town is the site of one of the earliest archaeological sites in the country, with one of the most interesting finds. This peninsula, called Paku, has a power site atop it, and here at the narrow neck was where in 1964 a midden was excavated that contained a pearl shell fishing lure. The layer the lure came out of dated to the 13th or very early 14th century, and pearl shell is not a material available in New Zealand. It likely came from the Marquesas or the Society Islands, meaning that this pearl shell lure was brought with Maori when they first colonised the country. Now, back to the South Island. Just north of Christchurch we have the site of Kaiapoi Pa, a fearsome fortress surrounded by dangerous swamps on 3 sides and heavily fortified on the remaining section. During the Musket Wars, this stronghold of Ngāi Tahu was besieged for 3 months by the Allied army of Te Raupraha in the summer of 1831 and 1832. Te Raupraha was a skilled and cunning general and had his warriors dig 2 or 3 large saps, zigzagging offensive earthworks up to the palisades of the Pa, finishing them by piling brushwood against the palisades, ready to burn them down. The defenders, seizing an opportunity when the wind was blowing away from the Pa, lit the brushwood themselves, and the smoke and heat drove Te Raupraha's forces from their saps. Unfortunately for the Ngāi Tahu defenders, the wind changed again, and the fire was then focused on the palisades, which burnt down, creating a breach that the attackers rushed through to great slaughter. Okay, we'll finish up back in the North Island, in a Northland town named Kerikeri. Here in 1819, a mission station was established by Samuel Marsden of the Church Missionary Society. Now managed by Heritage New Zealand, 2 of New Zealand's oldest standing buildings are located here. Kemp House, built in 1821, the home of the missionaries, and the Stone Store, built in 1832 as a warehouse, but later acted as a trading post, library, barracks, even a school. The missionaries lived through the Musket Wars, and their protector, the fearsome Hongi Hika, led raids and attacks all over the North Island. Thanks to Marsden, it was also the first place in New Zealand to have grapes and citrus cultivated, and was the first part of New Zealand to be ploughed. What I've said about each site is very much just a quick once-over. Any one of these sites there's enough information about to produce an entire video on their own. I hope this tour will help to illustrate the range of different archaeological sites we have here in New Zealand and the stories that they have to tell. Thanks for watching, and please like, comment and subscribe. Cheers!